rising sun flying high in the sky till the day is done. I can't break away. Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why. I can't break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. I can't break away. Oh, no, I can't break away. Ooh, I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Yeah, boy. I have been waiting for this episode for, 27 episodes. Evening, Gilly.
Gilly
Glad
does
you're
not
here.
shrink away from danger.
So, yes, tonight is the night we introduce the man from Corsica, Napoleon Bonaparte. It will not be a huge part of the episode, but it will be a significant part of the episode. The whole last section is about him. So let's go over a couple things. First, Manny, thank you for the 10 gift subs. Terry, thank you for the resub. 18 months, tier 1. Both very much appreciated. I did some back of the napkin math on kind of where I want things to go from here on out, because we're approaching the end of Robespierre, believe it or not. And Sai, welcome in. And so I was like, okay, we've been 28 episodes. That's more than I thought I'd need, and how many more do I think I'll need? And it's in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 episodes. So I feel like we will bring the French Revolution in for a landing probably sometime around June. At that point, we'll take a break, because I will need a break so I can start preparing for the Napoleonic era. It's me, VT. Thank you for the host. And I want to be upfront about the Napoleonic era. It's not going to be 50 episodes. And the reason is because politics is complicated. No, I don't have a tie on. I have a
Victor,
nice
that was a
sweater on.
private thing between you and me, and nobody else needs to know about that.
I have a nice sweater on. But politics is complicated. And we had to explore the whole French Revolution to set up Napoleon. War is not. War is not complex. War is battles and tactics. And I will be able to go through what I need to cover, which is relevant for Napoleon, much faster to get us to the Restoration and so on. So I wouldn't anticipate me spending forever on Napoleon like we have with the French Revolution. The glasses? Yeah, that's just to make sure I don't get a headache. What's up, VT?
My lord.
But yeah, so tonight's the night, right? We get to talk about Napoleon, but we got a whole bunch of other stuff to get through first. I just wanted you guys to have a sense for, we'll probably get to the end of the French Revolution and what is known as the Directory and into the consulship by June. And at that point, I'm going to put a line down and say that's the end of Series 1, and we'll go into Series 2, which will be Napoleon becoming emperor, and then the 10 years of that, up to the point that he, loses basically at Waterloo, and that's that. So there is a music video tonight, and that music video will play near the end of the show, but it is on Napoleon. I intentionally built the video with foreshadowing in mind. There will be events depicted in this video which are in the future. And I would encourage you to not only listen to the music, but to kind of note what you're seeing. Because when we get to those things, both in Series 1 and Series 2, you may recall back to this moment and go, oh yeah, I remember that was in that video. Lots of interesting war stuff, though, with Napoleon. Napoleon is more interesting tactically than he is from the position of the campaigns themselves. And I'm not going to get into that because we're going to get into that as a part of this series and a part of series 2 when we get into them. But the thing is think about how incredibly thick the content is for the French Revolution. There are a lot of names here, right? We've gone through a lot of names, and a lot of names are going to bubble back up today too. There are not as many names during Napoleon. Napoleon has a strangle grip on things while he's emperor, and the only people that are really that relevant are his marshals, the opponents in Europe, and those who were looking to undermine him in France, and there weren't that many people. Lafayette was one, but anyway, I just want to give you guys a frame of reference to that, and without further ado, we'll roll into tonight's concept. Yeah, well, maybe not you. Foreshadowing, five-shadowing, whatever. So when we last left our narrative, because last week we had to take a sidebar and explain how the whole calendar works, and I'm going to note on the intro from here on out the Republican months under the actual months that we're talking about. But when we last left the narrative 2 weeks ago, it was around Halloween, 1793. It was October 31st, 1793, and the Girondins, who had been, rounded up in French custody, and those who hadn't escaped house arrest, had all just been executed, right? Right after the Queen got executed, the Girondins who were in custody were also executed. Remember, it was like that 26 guys in 33 minutes efficiency that we talked about near the end of the episode? Well, that execution cleared out most of the Girondin faction in one big swoop, right? But there were some loose ends to deal with, and one of those is Madame Roland. You remember she's a lady who kind of, I wouldn't say birthed, but midwifed the Girondin faction in her own, salon, and it's 22 guys and one dead body. Yeah, you're right. Evening, Fletch, welcome in. But Madame Roland had been arrested way back during the insurrection of May 31st, June the 2nd, back when the Girondins were expunged from the convention. And she had been arrested because everyone knew that, she was maybe not a puppeteer except for anybody but her husband, but she had been a big force in organizing the Girondins as a group, however you want to define that group, as a party, as a faction, whatever. But she spent her last few months in the conciergerie as well, which remember is the antechamber of death, writing her memoirs, and she was finally brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal actually a few weeks after the rest of her Girondin friends had been executed. And she was convicted of treason under the new express lane rules regarding the length of trials very quickly. And she was led to the guillotine on November 8th. And so she stood up there on the scaffold and she uttered what are famous last words, and that's maybe a little bit apocryphal, meaning sure, did she really say it? But they were, quote, "O liberty, what crimes are committed in my name," end quote. The blade fell, and that was the end of Madame Roland. Her husband, Jean-Marie Roland, you remember she was kind of propping him up and forcing him into different roles here and there because women didn't have any political power. They had to kind of work through their husbands. Her husband, Jean-Marie Roland, had managed to actually slip out of Paris when everyone was being arrested back at the beginning of the summer. But when he learned of his wife's death and her execution, he literally despaired. He fell into a quick depression and he committed suicide on the side of the road. Just boom, done. So over the next few months, the remaining Girondins were either apprehended, the ones that kind of slipped out or weren't around the day that the big, net was cast, or they had escaped. But the ones who were apprehended over the following months were quickly brought toward their predictably fatal consequence at the Revolutionary Tribunal. These guys were now coming in, being arrested, tried, and convicted and executed within a 24-hour cycle. But the ones that didn't get arrested, the ones that had kind of slipped out to Normandy and had fostered that whole Federalist uprising, maybe, they also just started to commit suicide. Jérôme Pétion, you remember him, he was the second mayor of Paris, and a few others. They managed to hold out, ironically, until June 1794, when they finally all just basically came to the conclusion that the Great Terror masterminded by Robespierre just wasn't gonna end. It wasn't going to relent. And they committed suicide in June 1794. The irony here is that June 1794 is 1 month before Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety will fall. Had they just said, we can make it 1 more month, guys, they would have lived. But they didn't. They decided to off themselves right before the terror was over. So while I'm tying up loose ends here, just a few days before Madame Roland was, executed, the old first mayor of Paris, Jean-Sylvain Bailly, you'll remember he was a renowned astronomer, one of the most famous scientists of his day, and he was the first man elected as mayor of the Paris Commune government. He was also rolled before the tribunal, and get this one. He was accused of intentionally orchestrating the massacre at the Champ de Mars. Now, you'll remember, the massacre at the Champ de Mars did happen under his mayorship, but it was predicated from Jacques-Pierre Brissot's petition backed by the Cordelier Club. Now, Brissot's already been executed as a Girondin. So they're taking everyone out that was involved with this incident. It took no time to convict Bailly, the man who stood at the center of that painting, that Jacques-Louis David painting we all looked at way back when the National Assembly was formed, the oath at the tennis court. He's the guy in the middle of that painting. And he was quickly rolled out and executed. It's also probably worth noting that it's a really good thing for the Marquis de Lafayette that he's crossed the border and is now sitting in Allied custody in a prison right now, because had he been in Paris at this time, he surely would have been executed right along with Bailly, because you remember Lafayette was in charge of the guard at the Champ de Mars that day, and even though he didn't order shots to be fired, shots were fired, and he was blamed for it. And that was the incident that took Lafayette's reputation and tossed it into the toilet. Yeah, he would have been executed very quickly. It's a miracle that more of his family wasn't executed around this time. Some of them were, but his wife and his daughter make it. However, on November 12th, 1793, the guillotine was actually moved from the Place de la Révolution to the Champ de Mars, so Bailly could be executed on the spot where he, quote, betrayed the nation. And so, in the freezing rain, Bailly stood up on the scaffold. One man in the crowd shouted at him, "Do you tremble, Bailly?" To which he responded, "Yes, but only because it's cold." Kays, welcome in. The blade fell, and that was the end. The blade fell, and that was the end of the first mayor of Paris. So this is the revolutionary government, as the power begins to be completely vested in the Committee of Public Safety, just taking out everybody. Now, was this more of a, these guys were traitors to the revolution? Bailly, that's a hard case to make. I mean, this is the one incident, right? I mean, looking at his life, it's really hard to pin a lot of things on Jean-Sylvain Bailly, apart from, yeah, he happened to be mayor the day that the massacre at the Champ de Mars happened. This one in particular, to me, feels very much like those in power were simply taking out rivals. And we're going to get a little bit more into that consolidation of power into absolute power as we get through the episode today. But also a few episodes ago, I mentioned that while these major political figures are the victims that are most associated with the Great Terror, the bulk of the victims, and we ran through numbers 4 episodes ago. We ran through numbers, and the bulk of the victims of the Great Terror aren't political figures. They were obscure men and women who unfortunately happened to be on the wrong side of the day's reigning political faction. They also happen to fall under the jurisdiction of particularly bloodthirsty representatives on mission. We've established that the terror was largely in operation in departments who were recently in revolt against Paris. And the whims of the particular representative who was sent to your town would play a big part in how vicious the reign of terror was for you. Now, some of those towns were Lyon and Marseille, and there's a disparity between how bad it was in those two towns, who basically stood up around the same time and were pacified around the same time. But the first great example of this, how bad it will be for you, will be determined by the representative who is there, is in Lyon, which, remember, is out on the eastern side of France, near the frontier, close enough to where troops could come down from the frontier to do things there. But the first great example of this whole mechanic is in Lyon. Well, you'll remember the wheelchair-bound Georges Couthon had been the first guy that was sent there, right? This is the place where he was ordered to effectively destroy everything but the homes of the poor and erect a monument effectively saying Lyon stood against Paris and Lyon is no more. But you also should remember that we went over, Couthon had no taste for implementing this revolutionary style justice that was being demanded of him. And he was replaced by his more zealous colleague, Jean-Marie Collot d'Herbois. Now, d'Herbois is first row, or first column, middle row, for those of you at home trying to pick out a name. He's one of the three pencil sketches that looks like he maybe has something up his sleeve. Hopefully, you also will recall that d'Herbois was one of those guys that was actually appointed to the Committee of Public Safety to mollify the sans-culottes after the insurrection of September 5th, when they finally kind of gelled on who the 12 guys were. Now, d'Herbois, some people call him Collot. I refer to him as d'Herbois. I see it shortened to that most often in what I read. But d'Herbois, unlike Couthon, absolutely had a taste for revolutionary justice. That's a little bit of background. We're not going to go into the guy's whole life story here. But in his former pre-revolutionary life, d'Herbois had been an actor and a dramatist who had coincidentally spent 1787 running one of the major theaters in Lyon to what were apparently mixed reviews. So when d'Herbois came back to Lyon at the end of October 1793 to take up his new assignment, he was appalled at the bare minimum that Couthon had done to, punish this stronghold of federalism, which it kind of was. Only a dozen people had been really executed under Couthon, and only a few homes really had been destroyed. And this simply would not do in d'Herbois' eyes. He went so far as to question Couthon's judgment. Didn't Couthon realize that the people of Lyon simply would not know great theater? I mean, we're a gang of dangerous counter-revolutionaries who threatened the indivisibility of the nation? Now, this sentiment that I'm conveying, that he was a revenge-driven former theater owner, is subjective. I find it interesting that it probably did motivate his psyche, right? Like, there's no way you can disassociate that, poke in the eye in the past, but the guy was also off his rocker. So arriving with d'Herbois to Lyon was a contingent of that, you'll remember, sans-culotte, filled revolutionary army that had been demanded back in May and finally fulfilled in September. That we're going to fill an army with the best of the sans-culottes so they can just go out there and do whatever. And you'll remember the reason the Committee on Public Safety was like, yeah, let's do that, is because let's get them out of Paris. But that a portion of that army came with Desbois to Lyon. He dispatched these guys, these sans-culotte revolutionary army guys. There's not a great way to kind of phrase what they are. He dispatched them into Lyon every night to conduct house searches. And they overturned the city looking for suspects and evidence of treason, of course, which they found tons of, right? Remember to clonk that follow button. Though he had sped up the accusation and execution process, though he had sped up the accusation process and kind of got the ball rolling on speeding up the execution of people. Yes, way, Diggity, what's up? Say hi to Fish. Glad she's there safe. But though Desbois had sped up the whole process of accusing people through all these night raids and then executing them because he had more people to kill, he was still pretty dissatisfied that by the end of November 1793, he'd only managed to kill about 200 enemies of the nation. Yeah, it is like that. This bread and jam is treasonous. You're buying the wrong brand of bread. But he was upset that he had only been able to really murder 200 people by the end of November. That's like from when he rolled in October-ish time frame until November. And so he streamlined the operation of the tribunal even more to dispense justice faster. And almost overnight, so from the end of November into December, almost overnight, 300 more people were killed, executed, condemned. But the problem is that the convictions were now coming so fast because of the night raids and the way he streamlined everything, that the super efficient, by the way, 22 guys in 33 minutes, the super efficient guillotine couldn't keep up. No, it didn't break. It's just they couldn't raise it, get the convicted in and drop it as fast as they were being convicted. Yeah. So Desbois had to turn to mass executions. And he settled first on the practice of basically lining everybody up and shooting cannons at them. And this was really horrible, right? Like the idea that we're just going to put people in front of a piece of field artillery and shoot it at them at point blank range is nuts, right? But what's worse is that that's not guaranteed to kill somebody. Unless you're loading it with grape shot, which is, in video games, it's depicted as, effectively shoving forks and spoons inside of a cannon and firing that. And grape shot is the ability to fire dispersal. It's like shotgunning a cannon. But even if you're firing grape shot, or if you're firing a solid artillery round, you're not guaranteed to kill the person right in front of the cannon, right? Let alone the people lined up behind him. And so it turned out that a lot of people that were being executed, and mass execution by cannon, weren't dying. They were just really badly wounded. And so after the cannon fired, the sans-culotte revolutionaries there under Desbois' authority had to go around and effectively point their gun and fire, draw their sword and stab, and just finish everybody. This went on in Lyon all through the winter. And by the end of April 1794, something in the neighborhood of 2,000 people will have been killed in Lyon.
No way!
Yes way, 2,000 people will have been killed in Lyon by one means or another. Cannon, mass firing squads, guillotines dropping. It makes Lyon one of the great epicenters of the terror. And I have read anecdotally that there is kind of to this day, it's kind of like my great-grandma. My great-grandma was Polish in Poland. And she grew up not because of World War II, but because of the partitions that we've talked about, in this series. she grew up being taught to never trust Russians because Catherine the Great had decimated her country. And so when the Russians kind of invaded Poland with Germany in World War II, that further got fostered in my family, right? Where the Polish side of my family just don't trust Russians. It's there. It's like taught within my family. And the same sort of thing happens in Lyon to this day, where the people of Lyon are basically taught to hate Paris because Paris had done what Des Bois just did in Lyon. How could you have no conscience about it? Well, I can only speak as a soldier, right? Psychologically, when you begin to depict someone as your enemy, the psychological response in the brain is to dehumanize them. So that when you are slaughtering people, you are not seeing them as someone equal to yourself in terms of being human. That is consistent. That is consistent in history, that there has to be either a voluntary or involuntary psychological disassociation in the way one views their enemy. I had to do it whenever I was fighting. Other veterans can attest to, if they've been on the line, they have to do the same thing or they cannot deal with it. It's actually a source of where some PTSD comes from, where, okay, and then that switch gets flipped back the other way later on, and your conscience goes, holy crap, what did I do? But it's also so much in like what we see today contemporarily with, why do people get so upset that someone is telling them that they have to, wear a mask? It's because there's a switch that goes off that says, this person opposes me. They are my enemy. And so it becomes easier to punch people in the face or be rowdy on an airplane because the person you're doing it to isn't human in your eyes. You might not be thinking that, but that is what the brain does. The brain identifies not someone who is able to compromise with you or discuss with you, but someone who is staunchly opposing you. And in some brains, it's a very quick enemy. And the enemy response in the human brain is very fast to dehumanize the enemy. And so conscience becomes something that doesn't play in as hard because your brain is on board with the idea that what I am doing to this thing is okay because they are not human. This will play out in Germany in World War II very much. There's actually a word that the Nazis used for the people to the east that they were basically intentionally going to starve to death. They called them Untermensch. And the Untermensch, that word actually means subhuman. That's how people do unspeakable things in this context. That's if the question, how can you have no conscience about 2,000 people being murdered under your watch? It's because you have categorized them. Des Bois, again, a little crazy to begin with, but Des Bois categorized the enemies of the revolution as not human, less than human. When you stop seeing them as fellow human beings, yes, whatever the switches are, or the conditions, the criteria that lead you to that, that's how one can do it without a conscience. It's not that they don't have a conscience. It's that the conscience is willingly operating in conjunction with the idea that the enemy is not human. And I had none of the last 5 minutes on that written. That was all off the cuff psyops training and psychological warfare training and books I've read. And I am by no means a psychologist, nor am I a historian. I'm just students of both. But that's what happens. So again, this all went on with Des Bois and his contingent of sans-culotte army through April 1794. 2,000 people, plus or minus a little bit, effectively murdered under his watch in that one city. Again, making it one of the great, if you had a heat map of the Reign of Terror, it would be really red over Lyon. But though Des Bois is one of the more infamous practitioners of government by terror, he is not the most infamous. That distinction goes to the man who is bottom right, Jean-Baptiste Carrier, a man who actually may have been clinically insane when he was assigned to go to the Vendee to end the uprising. And we've talked about the Vendee uprising for many episodes. We've come back to it here and there. We are going to end the Vendee uprising effectively tonight. Before we get to Carrier, we are going to wrap up this campaign. We're going to wrap up the Vendee uprising. It's going to see the Republic of France emerge victorious. But it's important to note that the victory here tonight that we describe will not end the uprising. It will end the organized Catholic and royal army, the peasants who went out there and got their nobles to lead them and kind of congealed after they created a regular horse and captured artillery. They created themselves an army. And we talked about how if they had broken out earlier than they did, it would have been a different story. But we're going to end the organized Catholic and royal army, and it's going to transition into a systemic guerrilla war brushfire out there, where it's no longer about army versus army on the field. It's going to be about groups of small rebels in the Vendee making hit and fade type attacks, the type of warfare you think about if you understand the Vietnam War that the Viet Cong would have conducted, where it was hit and then get out of there before anybody can figure out who you are or where you're going. So when we last left the Vendee, the war out there in the west of France, the rebels had been soundly defeated at Cholet on October 17th. And you'll remember that the remains of that Catholic and royal army had then made the effort to slip across the Loire River north into Brittany. And the map that's on the screen right now it shows Cholet on 10/17/1793, and it shows the arrows. And this is all going to end. This map we've used several times. This will be the last time we bring this map up. The plan of the Catholic and royal army was to race north to the coastal city of Granville, which was the nearest port to the British island of Jersey. And they hoped from Jersey they would be able to get weapons, provisions, and maybe even some British regular reinforcements. But as the rebel caravan progressed, they picked up, disgruntled Bretons now that they're in Brittany along the way, because you'll remember the rural population of Brittany had also started a revolt back when the levy of 300,000 was placed down. But the reason that they hadn't been able to do what had happened in the Vendee in Brittany was because there was a significantly larger military presence in Brittany. That's all back when the whole thing in the Vendee got started. Brittany had its share of discontents, and as the Royal and Catholic Army, or the Catholic and Royal Army, started moving north to Granville, they started picking up these Breton malcontents that swelled their ranks. By the time the rebel army reached Granville on November 14th, they were numbering something around 60,000 men, women, and children. And they set up shop to lay siege to Granville. They did so hoping that British help would get there. Now, they set up the siege knowing what they had was not enough to break the city. But unfortunately, and despite the fact that the British and the Vendee rebels had been in touch with each other over the past few months, events moved too quickly here. They moved too quickly to get the alert to the British commander on Jersey that the rebel horde was effectively on its way to Granville. The big reason this happened is because Jersey's like 50 miles away, right, out there in the Atlantic Ocean. But all of the intelligence wasn't going from the leaders of the Catholic and Royal Army to the commander at Jersey. It was going to London, then to Jersey, then to London, and then back down to the Catholic and Royal Army. So there was this relay that occurred in there that added weeks to any correspondence that was going to occur between these two forces that needed to link up. So though they were just 50 miles away, if only the telegram had been invented and a cable been laid. But even though the British the British in Jersey and the rebels now besieging Granville were only basically 50 miles separated. And the British had plenty of supplies on the garrison at Jersey. The British did not get word of any of this actually happening until November 26th. That's 12 days after the rebel army laid down the first pieces of its siege at Granville. And by then it was too late. The British in Jersey, now aware that they should probably go help the rebels, sailed down to Granville on December 2nd. That's a pretty quick turnaround, right? From finding out, hey, we've got to go do something, to actually showing up about a week to get ships in motion back in the age of sail. It's pretty fast. But it was too late. The rebels had already abandoned the siege. They were forced to. They had run out of supplies, and they didn't have the force. So with their position untenable, without British aid, the rebels decided to try to force their way back into their home territory in the Vendee. So they came all the way up to Granville, and they decided to go all the way back down to the Vendee, because where else were they going to go? If the breakout plan was to get assistance from the British, and the British didn't come, well, I guess we have to go home. The only thing that's in question here for me strategically is, why lay the siege? Why not just pull up along the Britain coast and say, we're here, come help, then we'll go siege? But that's not how it went down. So they tried to force their way back into the Vendee. But on December 4th, when they reached it, they weren't able to force their way back across it. Remember, General Francois Westerman is out there. And about a week after December 4th, Westerman catches up with the rapidly disintegrating rebel army at Le Mans. And he ordered what is still at this point in history a rare thing, a night attack. Night attacks are always highlighted in history books basically prior to the invention of electricity, because they just didn't happen that often. But he ordered a night attack on the rebel position.
Oh, yes.
And he obliterated them. He absolutely annihilates the rebels. Westerman went further, though, and ordered that no quarter be given. And around 10,000 rebels were killed either in the night fight or in the subsequent retreat. Interesting to note that for those of you who are any student of Roman history, Scipio Africanus and Hannibal, one of the great clashes of antiquity infantry. Scipio gets the upper hand in North Africa against the Carthaginians because he effectively does a night attack, which was unheard of back then. And he set fires in the Carthaginian camp and had his army standing at the door and just waited for them to run out of the on-fire camp and just killed them. That's really not the grand idea of two great armies coming in. He was lauded for it. So anyway, night attacks are... You didn't know that the ship's name was a Roman reference. There's a lot of things in your life. Yeah, the Scipio Africanus from The Expanse. Scipio Africanus is the great rock star of Roman history prior to Julius Caesar. A very interesting guy. And you should definitely look into him if you haven't. But I would say his contemporary Hannibal is far more interesting. Yeah, but Scipio is the family name, and Africanus is the cognomen that is put on him after he is victorious in North Africa. He is called that afterwards. And if you watch the movie Gladiator, the group fight that occurs in the Colosseum, they actually refer to that as Scipio Africanus against the barbarian Carthaginian horde. That's what's being depicted there in that game. Anyway, back to the story here. Sorry, I can get on a history tangent all night long. But again, Westerman catches up with them at Le Mans. The Dr. Death Games. Tier 3, 19 months. Welcome in, my friend. Hopefully you're having a good night. Westerman orders no quarter. For those not familiar with the term, it means take no prisoners, basically. It means we don't offer quarter. It means even to the officers, no quarter. Kill everybody. We will take no prisoners. So then on December 23rd, the last of what was basically 10,000 remnants of the Catholic and Royal Army were cornered at Savenay. And almost all 10,000 were killed in the ensuing battle or the mass executions of prisoners that Westermann ordered after he was victorious. And Westermann supposedly writes back in a very chilling letter to the Committee of Public Safety following this battle that, quote, "There is no more Vendee, Republican citizens. It died beneath our free sword and with its women and its children. I have just buried it in the swamps and the woods of Savenay. Following the orders that you gave me," that's clever, "I crushed their children under the horses' hooves and massacred the women, who, those at least may bear no more brigands. I do not have a single prisoner to reproach myself with. I have exterminated them all." End quote. Now, this letter is either extreme hyperbole or a later fabrication, but it does fit in with Republican conduct after major field operations ceased, especially given the conduct of Jean-Baptiste Carrier, to say nothing of the infernal columns, which we're not going to talk about tonight, but they're horrible. It's what happens in the Vendee after the Vendee is not really fighting anymore. And they haven't even started to go yet. There's a reason I quote things like that, though, Dustin, is because whether he said it, maybe, I don't think it was exactly where he wrote. I think maybe it was embellished by the committee in their own records because that's the source of it. It's not like the actual letter it was quotable, but it does fit with the mindset, and therefore it kind of illuminates thinking because someone wrote it down. Someone in a position of power somewhere wrote that down in the days surrounding the final Catholic and Royal Army defeat at Savenay. And on that note, it is time to take one of these down. There is no Catholic and Royal Army anymore. Again, the Vendee rebels aren't done. But it turns into like the early days of the rebellion in Star Wars where they didn't have any capital ships anymore, right? They're just snub fighters going out there and doing stuff and getting the hell out of there. There is no organized effort in the Vendee anymore. But while the war proper was being waged north of the Loire River, Carrier was being dispatched as the representative on mission to Nantes, with near absolute authority over the 3 Vendee departments that had been in revolt. Maybe Hebert wrote it, except Hebert didn't sit on the Committee of Public Safety, so. But we're going to get to Carrier and what he does as the Catholic and Royal Army is basically being annihilated by Westermann, because now here he is. Here it is. Another defeated, basically, stronghold of rebellion. You saw what Desbois did out in Lyon. What Carrier does in the Vendee is worse. We'll take our break. We'll come back to that. And we are still in the first item on the list of things tonight. But we'll come back after a break. Make sure you stand up, get a drink, stretch your legs, and all that cool stuff. And I'll talk to you all in just a few minutes.
Let's rock!
We're back! So strap in for a little bit of a longer episode tonight because
Remember to clonk
still
that
not
follow
done
button.
with the first section, and I'm on page 4 of my notes, and there are 13 pages. So again, while the war was being waged north of the Loire River, and before they came back down to Le Mans and then over to Savenay, Jean-Baptiste Carrier was being dispatched as representative on mission to Nantes, which is Nantes in the middle of your screen on that map. He was given authority over the 3 departments, which comprise what we call the Vendee. Now, Carrier had been a far left member of the Mountain since he was elected to the National Convention. And he had already been dispatched once as representative on mission up to Normandy, where he, weirdly, had showed a very judicious temperament, and the tribunals he ran up in Normandy conformed to something that resembled the rule of law. When he was transferred to Nantes, something had changed, though. Perhaps it was a cue from Paris that the terror was now the order of the day and things needed to change with how everything was going down. It's also possible that once he got to Nantes, he became a little unhinged because he was watching the brutality that was happening between the Republicans, who he was obviously on the side of, and what the Catholic and Royal rebels were doing. Because remember, we just depicted Westermann as a butcher, and he was. But he wasn't the only butcher. Wars don't ever have butchers on just one side. But regardless, Carrier arrived in Nantes with pretty much nothing but cold-blooded brutality in his heart, or it germinated really quickly after he got there. He directed this cold-blooded brutality most especially at the clergy in the Vendee, who he believed were behind the entire Vendee uprising. Now, you will remember the clergy and the church were a big contributing factor to why the Vendee revolted. They had hid their non-juring priests and kept them safe and fed them when authorities came around. Because those priests were, those guys who had gone off and then come home to minister to their own people. They weren't priests that had been placed there by other means. He's not exactly wrong. You're not wrong. He's not exactly wrong. The priests were up there on the pulpit denouncing all the stuff that was happening in 1789, 1790, and 1791. So they certainly were responsible for fueling that engine. But Carrier's plan for the clergy of the Vendee was to simply wipe them out. Under Carrier's direction, accusation and conviction became synonymous terms in the Vendee. It would actually be too much to call his tribunals, that were basically just a queue of processing prisoners, show trials. They weren't even that. It was basically, you come in, stamped, you go die. It was that fast. Unlike even other places, where it was maybe possible that if you showed up before a tribunal, there was still the rare acquittal. There were no acquittals under Carrier. If you were accused, you were doomed. But Carrier ran into the same problem that Desbois ran into over in Lyon. The guillotine, while very efficient, was not able to keep up with the pace of convictions. So, Carrier initially does kind of the same thing Desbois does. He initiates large-scale firing squads outside the towns. But then Carrier improvised an even more sinister method of mass execution, which he would primarily use against the clergy, but then later expand into everybody. This is where I will note, while this is not as sensitive as what I, kind of warned you about last week, this is nasty. Carrier ordered carpenters to rig barges that they were going to place in the Loire River so they could effectively be sunk at will and then been brought back up out of the river. So on November 19th, 90 priests were hog-tied and led onto the barge, which was then floated a distance out into the Loire River, still under the control of everyone on the shore. And then the plugs that had been engineered into this barge were pulled, pop. Now these priests are out there on this floating platform, hog-tied, basically at this point laying down and struggling. And the barge sinks. Carrier appears to have been so delighted with the result that this practice of mass drowning in the Loire River becomes regular practice for him. About once a week for the next 2 months, a barge full of prisoners would be floated out into the Loire River, plugs would be pulled, and then be sunk. This process would become known as, quote, Republican baptisms in the national bathtub, end quote. But wait, there's more. As the drownings proceeded, new humiliations were devised, and on at least one documented occasion, men and women were stripped naked and then tied to each other in pairs before they were drowned, with the mocking revolutionaries laughingly referring to these pairings as, quote, Republican marriages. It's grim. Of course, as these drownings progressed, they became more indiscriminate. And instead of, targeting just priests, they involved into including old men, women, and even children being killed if they were simply suspected of being a royalist sympathizer, which frankly in the Vendee is everyone.
No way!
Yes way. And it is literally this suspected of being a royalist sympathizer. Richie Cranium, welcome in and thank you for the raid. We are currently in a very sensitive topic about the treatment of tribunal suspects in the Vendee in late 1793. But again, the idea that these people who are being effectively mass drowned, welcome in raiders, were being drowned because they were royalist sympathizers, and that under the law of suspects is simply someone pointing a finger at you, is a flimsier set of rationale than the rationale... What's up, Richie? It's a flimsier rationale than the rationale used by, mass butchers in history like Pol Pot and Hitler. What Carrier did, even just this, which is just one piece of what he did, even this, and the way he justified who was to be killed, literally is, war crime level atrocity. Had it gone on for years, and Wyden could have become Holocaust-esque. The final grisly details are really disputed because record keeping wasn't great out there. But somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 men, women, and children were drowned in the Loire River over the winter of 1793-1794. This is on top of everyone that Carrier was guillotining or killing in his mass firing squads, because those numbers I don't have. I just know that the numbers, that 2,000 to 4,000 range figure is just the drownings. Don't worry, though. Justice will come for Carrier in September 1794, but not before he denies he had anything to do with all of it, which we can prove he ordered. So again, this is the terror dealing with its rebellious traitor enemies in its eyes. But the cases of Desbois in Lyon and Carrier in Nantes, they are the extreme edge of the first stage of the Great Terror. This extreme edge wasn't reached just because Lyon and Nantes were, hotbeds of revolt. It was also very much due to the individual personalities of the men in charge of the reprisals in those specific locations. Carrier and Desbois were simply bloodthirsty fanatics. And I mentioned this earlier, and by way of contrast, over the same period we just explored in Lyon and Nantes, down in Marseille, which was another Federalist stronghold, Pork Chop, what's up? Welcome into Fixer's Heavy Metal History. But this same period, we had just talked about 2,000 people being killed in Lyon and 2,000 to 4,000 people plus some being killed out in Nantes, in the Loire River, and guillotine and all that. The same period of time down in Marseille, again another Federalist stronghold, just under 1,000 people were brought to the tribunal. Not executed outright. Under 1,000 people in Marseille are brought to the tribunal under the same time period. And of that just under 1,000, about half are outright acquitted. You can go. We're going to get to the Committee of Public Safety in a minute. But again, half of 1,000 accused, are let go in Marseille. Of those convicted, so around 500, only about half again were executed. 289 people to be exact over the same period are executed in Marseille, as opposed to 4,000 plus in the Vendee. And you can't whittle it down to, one was no. It comes down to who was in charge. Directly at the point in each of these places. Obviously, the individual in charge of Marseille wasn't crazy. Meanwhile, over in Bordeaux, which was another stronghold and effectively the Girondin capital, a city which had called for the Federalist army to march on Paris, only 3,000 people from the entire Girondin department are executed over this same time period. Go ahead and mute my phone so it stops going beep beep in the background here. So the disparity is striking. Yeah, cities like Lyon and Nantes, which are murder factories, under the control of fanatical murderers. And then you have other places which are not. It is this random and unsystematic application of terror that started to really trouble the members of the Committee of Public Safety back in Paris. In some cases, they believed that in some cases this unchecked and bloody excess of people like Carrier and Desbois was just going to create more enemies than it expunged. They're absolutely right in that logic. In other places, they were afraid of dangerous leniency. I'm assuming Marseille and Bordeaux. They were suspecting that the leniency of the terror in these other cities was actually being purchased. That the less than virtuous representatives on mission who were acquitting more than half of the people they accused, for example, were ready to take that nearly unlimited amount of power that they had been gifted. Pork chop, you're welcome. Best job I ever had. But the committee was concerned that in the places where the terror had been lenient, that the representatives were basically pocketing. They were taking bribes to not convict and execute people. And they feared that the national purity, which was the concept behind the terror, wasn't going to be correctly executed in places where the representative was being lenient. This untidiness and inconsistency in the terror, it really bothered Maximilien Robespierre to no end. Like, he did not like And he's a control freak. He did not like that you couldn't point at the way the terror was being implemented in all these various locations and see that there was a common pattern to it. But that is how the first stage of the Great Terror is playing out in these cities. How the Republic is dealing with its traitorous enemies outside of the big names that we've talked about. We've just talked about, upwards of 10,000 people being killed in a couple months. But this lack of standardization, pivoting to our second point tonight, was not the only thing that was bothering Maximilien Robespierre at the end of 1793. The other big thing that really bugged him was when violent dechristianization of France really takes over. Now, Robespierre had no common ground with the atheists out there and their desire to destroy the church, the Catholic Church. Not only did Robespierre consider religion to be, in some form, essential to civic life, but he also believed that the dechristianization movement itself was a major part of that foreign plot that Fabre d'Eglantine had brought to him. Now, Robespierre believed this as well because the brief history of the revolution has proven that nothing alienates people from the revolution faster than assaulting the Catholic Church. Remember those first civic oaths back in 1789 that turned the disaffected clergy from supporters of the National Assembly and the revolution into arch nemesis practically overnight? And then we saw how the impacts on the local clergy and the property of the church really were the catalyzing things that put gas in the tank for the Vendée uprising, which the levy of 300,000 sparked. Robespierre was convinced that the only people who would push for an even harsher anti-religious platform than was already in place had to have a sinister motive. He could not believe that for many of the leftist revolutionaries out there, the elimination of religious superstition from public life was just a logical conclusion of the project. And for a lot of Enlightenment rationalists, it was. But he saw any further steps toward destruction of the church as counter-revolutionary. And remember, Robespierre is going to become that middle model, right? He is going to basically think of himself as the model revolutionary, and those who are too modern or too crazy will both be problems for him. But this latest round of anti-religious sentiment that is now boiling and going to take shape and form and action in France can be traced back to the rise of Jacques Hébert, the guy who is the replacement voice of the people in place of the assassinated Jean-Paul Marat. Hébert himself was an avowed atheist who wanted to tear the whole facade of religious superstition down, and this is where I must caveat this. I'm not calling religion superstition. Your religion is meaningful to you as an individual, and I am not trying to undermine it. I am trying to contextualize it from the perspective of the people referring to it. So from Hébert's perspective, religion was superstition. I don't mean to insult anyone ever in how I discuss religion in this series, but it is important to use the correct wording to form the context of perspective of the individuals being discussed. And I hope that you can all make that separation. But again, Hébert was an avowed atheist. He wanted to destroy what he saw as superstition, this facade of believing in a higher power that he didn't believe existed. He just wanted it all burned down. But more specifically, the movement can be traced to a representative on mission named Joseph Fouché. Joseph Fouché is top row, middle column. Fouché, for those of you with any knowledge of Napoleonic era history, yes, this is the same Joseph Fouché. Because Fouché is a world-class survivor. He will go on to become Minister of Police under the Directory, which is going to replace the Terror. And he will also be Minister of Police under First Consul and then Emperor Napoleon. He's a pretty renowned guy. He is a notorious side switcher. He's going to wear many hats in his career, and this career will take him all the way to the Bourbon Restoration. But at present, in late 1793, he is in the early far left radical side of his career. And Fouché had been assigned as representative on mission out in the Vendee in the early days of the Vendee Uprising. So he's not there anymore, and Carrier's there now. But he emerged from his time as representative on mission out in Nantes, effectively, convinced that the Catholic Church needed to be eradicated if the revolution was going to survive. So, in the autumn of 1793, when Fouché was appointed as representative on mission in Nièvre in central France, he arrived in Nièvre with a rather bold plan. On his own initiative, with no orders whatsoever, he started to forcibly dechristianize the entire department with the help of local volunteers who formed their own revolutionary army that was modeled on that one that was stood up by the sans-culottes in the aftermath of the insurrection of September 5th. Fouché and his local sans-culotte army went around in the department stripping churches of all of their religious iconography. They effectively were like Viking raiders. They went into these places, they stripped whatever that could be found of value, and then shipped it off to the treasury so that it could help fund the revolution's wars. He even went so far as to order crosses be removed from cemeteries, and that he then ordered that the inscription, "Death is an eternal sleep," be posted outside of these newly rationalized burial grounds. Now, the phrase, "death is an eternal sleep," is effectively them posting a sign that says, that's it. When you die, you die. There is no afterlife. What your religion believes is wrong. Now, in place of all this superstition, Fouché introduced a new civic religion, which would merge seamlessly with the short-lived cult of reason, which we're going to get to. Fouché's dechristianization really caught on when another guy, Pierre Gaspard Chalmette, so that's middle guy on the grouping. Pierre Gaspard Chalmette, a native of Nièvre, who also happened to be at this time in history the president of the Paris Commune, so basically mayor. He came home to Nièvre for a visit. Chalmette was already a staunch enemy of the counter-revolutionary superstitions of the clergy, so he was pretty excited about what Fouché's doing and the zeal with which he was doing it. After kind of getting the notes from Fouché, and Chalmette goes back to Paris. He gets there fired up to transform the capital along the same lines he had just seen Fouché doing on his visit home. And then he wanted to export it across all of France. Fouché was meanwhile reassigned from Nièvre to join Des Bois in Lyon, where he continued his zealous destruction of all things Christian, and he helped Des Bois implement some of the worst excesses of the Terror. So Fouché again starts dechristianization in Nièvre, again gets reassigned out to Lyon to join Des Bois after he meets with Chalmette, and then does the same thing in Lyon while also saying, yeah, all this stuff you're doing out here, massively murdering everybody, Fouché's on board with that. The fact that Fouché will survive the coming Thermidorian reaction in the summer of 1794 and have this long career that he has after is mind-blowing to me. There are snakes out there who know how to wiggle their way through the currents of bad things in history, and Fouché is a survivor. But when Chalmette returned to Paris, he immediately set to organizing what is called the Festival of Reason, which would culminate with the Cathedral of Notre Dame being rededicated. And I don't want to say the word rechristened because it has nothing to do with Christian religion. Notre Dame will be rededicated as the Temple of Reason. Historically, it is called that for a while. They placed an altar inside, replacing the Christian altar. And above the main door of Notre Dame Cathedral, the inscription, "To Philosophy," was inscribed. Now, the Festival of Reason itself involved girls dressing up in old Roman togas, because we've made the connection repetitively from the French Revolution to Roman virtue.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Napoleon himself has his own Roman complex that we're going to get into down the road. Go Irish. But this Festival of Reason involved girls dressing up in old Roman-style togas and then, wearing a tri-colored sash of the revolutionary colors on top of it. And then everyone gathering around an actress who was kind of playing like the part of the goddess of reason or something like that. The festival was then repeated all throughout France as copycat revolutionary armies also started to spring up all across France. Those revolutionary armies, by the way, that were not the one formed after the insurrection of September 5th, eventually numbered in the ballpark of about 40,000 people out there, actively dechristianizing everything. Well, these armies started to strip away all of the symbols of Christianity pretty much everywhere. Churches were ransacked and just forcibly closed. Clergy were forced to renounce their offices and to take wives. And we're talking about the civic clergy who had sworn every sort of oath that had ever been asked of them. They were the ones now being told, renounce your office and get married. So, this was no longer about what it had been about back in 1789 and 1790, putting the church and its assets under the authority of the nation. This was now simply about purging the church from the nation. Now, in place of Christianity, men like Hébert and Chalmette, a bunch of others, hoped to found the cult of reason, which they dreamed of being like some sort of civic anti-religion. Now, it would have the outward trappings of religion with things like congregations and acts of devotion, but there would be no God to worship. Only the people, who they would try to perfect through the noble pursuit of liberty and reason. These would be human faculties, human characteristics, which would be admired, but not worshipped. And for a brief while, over the winter of 1793-1794, the cult of reason picked up adherents among the sans-culottes, and were led by the more radical intellectuals. This whole thing was kind of led from the radical intellectuals from the Paris Commune government. Now, you'll remember back when Marat died, I talked about how eventually there's going to be busts of Marat in churches. This is how it gets to that point, because the cult of reason doesn't stick for long, but these churches have now been dechristianized, and in place of the crosses, some of these churches will eventually put a statuette bust of Jean-Paul Marat in martyrdom and actually start to worship him, and yeah, it's weird. However, all of this was all strongly resisted by Robespierre, the cult of Marat, I didn't expect that one. Yep. You're like, what? Again, all this dechristianization, though, was strongly resisted by Robespierre and Georges Danton, who both thought the whole project of de-iconography of Christianity, all of this, any approach to trying to stamp out religion was just counterproductive, dangerously counterproductive. Both men were very strongly and publicly opposed to dechristianization. Robespierre said publicly he called the Festival of Reason a ridiculous farce and said that atheism was aristocratic. He was tying the idea that if you don't believe in a higher power to Enlightenment aristocracy, like you had to be some super rich guy to have had some fancy dandy education to reach these conclusions. He said that the people of France believed in a supreme being and that trying to violently purge religion from France was folly of the worst kind. And he's right there. I mean, there's historically, even in the 4 or 5 years we've really focused on here, he's right because history proves that right. You can't just walk in, yank away someone's religion and expect things to go well. Look back to the Christmas episode. Co-opting religion into your religion makes, that works. That's how we got Christmas. But with dechristianization, a new line is being drawn in the revolutionary sands, right? We have all these lines, or you're either still with the revolution or you're against the revolution throughout this entire 28 episodes and counting. But this one just so happened to parallel a line being drawn in the sand at the same time over, should the reign of terror continue? You see, by the end of 1793, the situation everywhere in France seems to have improved dramatically, meaning the reason why the terror was necessary, well, some people were going, do we still need this? The Federalist revolt had been pretty much squashed, except for Toulon, which we're going to get to. The rebels in the Vendee had been put to flight, and the region was now, nominally back in Republican hands after Savenay, falls and they're dispersed. And up along the frontier, which I haven't talked about in a few episodes, the Allies were in retreat after what had gone down at Dunkirk. So Danton, the man who coined the phrase "terror is the order of the day," now stood up in the Jacobin Club and said it was time to start winding it all back down. Danton was very clear of his view that the emergency situation which merited all this had passed. And when he was attacked for his moderation, Maximilien Robespierre, of all people, stood up in the Jacobin Club and defended him. This line, these two lines, dechristianization, should the terror continue, this all marked a new round and one of the most intense rounds of factional fighting between the revolutionaries. And we've seen a lot of factional fighting, right? We can go back and count them all. There's a lot of times where factions are just at each other's throats. But a lot of the time, those factions play out within the legislative body. This isn't going to play out that same way. Those who circled around Danton and wanted to dial back the excesses of the terror were dubbed the Indulgents because they wanted to indulge the enemies of the revolution. Those who circled around Jacques Hébert, who supported Christianization and wanted to ratchet up the terror and kill even more people, well, they weren't dubbed anything. They didn't have a name. But I'm going to borrow a term from Robespierre's measuring stick of revolutionaries and call them ultras because they were ultra-revolutionary. That's how I'm going to refer to these two groups from now on, as the Indulgents and the Ultras. Now, our next episode. I'm not guaranteeing next week, but I've done great progress on getting reviews done, and I believe I will be able to continue my pace. Our next episode will be about the running battle between the Indulgents and the Ultras, which is a battle that neither of them will win. Because by that time, that their battle comes to a head, the Committee of Public Safety will have so firmly cemented their control on power that they will simply feed both factions to the guillotine. Remember, there's Robespierre controlling what is an acceptable revolutionary in the middle. You have the indulgents and the ultras. He's just going to take both those lanes and feed them right in. That's the difference. Usually one faction wins and one faction loses. That's how it's been so far. In this case, no one's going to win. Now, this final. Yeah, stop fighting right now or I'll turn this car around and guillotine you all. I bet in some car in France somewhere that's been said. Somewhere along the line in history. But that final consolidation of power that I just referred to, or the Committee of Public Safety, have been so slowly acquiring jurisdiction over things. That final lock for them, supreme authority, was made possible by a law passed by the National Convention at the beginning of December, on December 4th, 1793, or, as it is called in the Republican calendar, 14 Frimaire, year 2. Now, the convention was confronting this haphazard reign of terror that no one really seemed to be in control of, and a spontaneous and potentially sinister, if you believe the foreign plot, Dechristianization movement. So a wary National Convention decided to take the last few bits of authority left and invest them in the Committee of Public Safety, which is what they needed to truly turn the 12 men into a de facto dictatorship running France. In this sweeping piece of legislation, again passed September 4th, 1793, or 14 Frimaire, year 2, on this new calendar.
No way!
This way, virtually the entire apparatus of government, all government everywhere, was put under control of the Committee of Public Safety. First, this meant bringing to heel the representatives on mission who the convention itself had been dispatching out there to run things out in the department, because everyone's now concerned, you're too lenient, you're crazy bloodthirsty. Vested with near absolute power in their assigned provinces, this meant that the representatives on mission were now going to not be able to just do whatever they wanted to. They were going to have to take orders from and answer directly to the Committee of Public Safety. They hadn't been doing that to this point. They just been doing what they want to do and reporting it back to the convention. That's over. Now it's being not just reported to, but authorized by, initiated by, the Committee of Public Safety. And all those spontaneous revolutionary armies out there that were being stood up to dechristianize things, the representatives out there in their provinces were ordered to stand those down under the law of 14 Frimaire. But the law also gutted the power of local governments. All local authorities. It gutted them to be basically nothing but implementers of the committee's will. Now remember, all those municipal and departmental governments which had been set up in the early days of the National Assembly as a response to the creation of the Paris Commune, well, they were now told they could not alter or interpret decrees to suit the needs on the ground, that they had to do it exactly as it was being directed by the committee. And I'm going to just start calling the committee, by the way, because there's other committees out there, but I'll name them fully when I talk about them. If I say the committee, it's the Committee of Public Safety. But these municipal and departmental governments out there were also certainly no longer permitted to initiate any new decrees on their own distinct from the edicts coming from the committee. Because those local authorities had been like a hotbed of federalism, right? And they were now going to be monitored very closely and being given the keys to absolutely nothing. Agents on behalf of the committee, yes, more agents now to oversee the agents. Agents would arrive shortly to make sure that no one was thinking for themselves. And these new agents that were directly reporting to the Committee of Public Safety would send back reports to Paris every 10 days like clockwork. All of the local surveillance committees and tribunals would now report their findings up the chain of command to the committee instead of acting on them outright. And then the committee would send orders in response for those surveillance committees and those tribunals to implement. The entire apparatus of the Reign of Terror, and this is where I say the Reign of Terror enters phase 2 in my mind, the entire apparatus of the terror was now going to be centrally planned and monitored and directed by the Committee of Public Safety. Everything everywhere throughout France was now firmly and completely under the jurisdiction of the 12 men on the Committee of Public Safety. Now, this was, of course, an anathema to everything the revolution had stood for, and was now even a more dangerous and more centralized version of the power that the Ancien regime had once held. However, Robespierre defended the law and said that constitutional government could not survive in the chaos and anarchy that was currently defining France. The goal of a constitutional government, he said, was to preserve the Republic. But France had not gotten that far yet, and France needed a revolutionary government whose goals would be to found the Republic and put it on solid enough ground so that later constitutional government could come in and preserve what the revolutionary government had done. That's the excuse used by every single dictatorship that arises in the aftermath of a revolution. It's the excuse of communism in the Soviet Union. It is the excuse of communism in China to this day that we can't have democracy yet because we haven't put it on a firm enough footing yet. And eventually people get accustomed to dictatorship. But that's how he, before there was a thing known as communism, or before Europe largely rebels in the mid-19th century, Robespierre got it. He understood. Now, whether he believed this or not, I don't know. But he understood what was necessary to hold power. For sure. Maybe he was right. Maybe it all had to be done. But the Law of 14 Frimaire put a dictatorial committee in charge of France. And that committee would inevitably start to conflate their interests with the nation's interest and make them into the same thing. Because that is, of course, the nature of humans who are handed absolute power. So God help you if you were a threat to their interest. Oh, of course, that's the national interest too, right? But God help you if you were a threat to the interest of one of these 12 men. Because that meant by default that you were a threat to the nation and liable to become a victim of the newly centralized and optimized Reign of Terror. No man rules innocently. No absolutely powerful man rules innocently. And it's hard to find anyone with even a slice of power who's executed that power innocently. I think Julius Caesar is a good example, though. I think had he not been assassinated, Rome might have been very different, and therefore our future might have been very different, but he didn't live. I think he had good intentions, based on what his opponents even said about him. But he's a rare occurrence in history. I think Napoleon had good intentions, too. People think of him as a monster in some circles. I don't. I think that he was coming to power at the end of an era of chaos, not just in France, but in Europe, and was just trying to get it all stable. So, we're going to take our second break here as we wrap up the Law of 14 Frimaire. And we're going to come back for the part everyone's excited about. So, stand up, get a drink, go to the bathroom, stretch your legs. The man from Corsica is next.
Je vais pousser un triomphe terrible en rousse avec mes water slide.
Let's go! It's time! Welcome back. Hopefully you're back. You will notice that the map on the Vendee is gone, and I have moved the map of Toulon up. It's only really to give you a sense of the geography of the place, that it's a bay-type city. I've also drawn a black line along the bottom of the map on the French map we usually have up that just kind of shows you where Toulon is. There's a black arrow pointing to it. Ironically, this is a very good map of Toulon. It's also taken from a board game. It's just a really good representation of elevations and everything else that goes on in Toulon. We're not really going to point at it too much during this discussion, but I wanted you to be aware of its source and why I chose it. But the Law of 14 Frimaire comes into being, and the process of all of these agents going out and standardizing the terror begins. But about 2 weeks after the law was put into effect, the newly empowered committee received some very, very good news. I would go so far as to say it is as critical to the modern world we understand as the levee en masse was. It was news that would bolster the indulgent argument that the national emergency was receding and that the terror could be dialed back because the all-important port of Toulon had been retaken. Now, you'll remember when the Marseille Federalists kind of were run out of town, they went to Toulon, and Toulon went into uprising, and their solution was to actually invite the British into the city, to sail into the city. So there is the city of Toulon, occupied by not only French rebels, but British regulars, Navy and Army. And this city, Toulon, was also the key French naval shipyard and dockyard on the Mediterranean Sea. It was basically their southern naval HQ. So the idea that it falls back into French hands is a big deal for the French Revolution. Who does it is important for the history of the world.
Soldier at heart and a child of war. Napoleon Bonaparte, a master of the game and equal to God, invading the lands of greed and fraud. Turn warfare to an art. He was known as the chosen one, born 1769 in Corsica. His family's joy and pride. He's just like a fairy tale. His boy wasn't up for sale and he never lied. But how he cried.
That follow button.
And the glory of the brave, going down in history forever. I will rule the universe. I shall cross their sorrow's veil, and soon I will be marching into heaven. I'm greater than God. Who could believe this boy would achieve all of his dreams and what he believed? He went down in history. The block has an end, you know it well. Heaven is bound to turn into hell. His time was running out. At the Battle of Waterloo, no chance, the enemy was fucking strong. And here's another song. What's the end of the fairy tale? Everyone is bound to fail, it must be right. That is every tried. I will rule the universe. I'm the glory and the brave, going down in history forever. I will rule the universe. I shall cross this sorrow's trail, and soon I will be marching into heaven. I'm greater than God. There are many types of heroes, and this is one of a kind. In this age so full of zero, I keep shall cross their sorrow's veil, and soon I will be marching into heaven. I will rule the universe, and the glory and the brave, going down in history forever. I will rule the universe, I shall cross their sorrow's veil, and soon I will be marching into heaven. I'm pretending God.
Now, before we get into this, I like Napoleon because I can step back from some of his excessive, maybe brutal tactics and appreciate the genius of it in the same way I can do it with Julius Caesar. There are 3 generals as a soldier that I would volunteer to fight under. He is one of them. Caesar's one of them. Hannibal's the other one. Napoleon, in that video, I depicted the Sphinx, the streets of Paris, the Great Pyramids, and a city on fire. The streets of Paris is going to be the first thing in that foreshadowing we're going to get to. We're going to get to the Egypt campaign, where the great Lord Nelson, that you may be familiar with from other sources of history like Master and Commander, did he, I guess we'll answer that question now. No, he did not shoot the Sphinx's nose off. Yeah, that is a misnomer. We're going to shoot down many, many misnomers about Napoleon. No, he did not shoot off the Sphinx's nose. It was gone before he got there. But the Egyptian campaign is going to be part of this series because it is a part of the French Revolution. The famous Battle of the Nile is what people know. But I'm going to speak to more about tactics that Napoleon conceived while he was there, which are far more impressive. But anyway, I guess fanboy is the right way to say it. I really like Napoleon from the perspective of a history buff because he's fascinating to me. But what is about to go down in Toulon in 1793 is his moment. It is the thing that allows him to do everything that happens after it. And that's a lot. A lot in terms not just of what he did in France, but how he affected your life. So as we go through all this, and as we continue to tell now his story, because we are on Napoleon's story path to empire, bear in mind that this is the day. That had this day or this event gone differently, or a couple of people not made specific decisions, our world, the world you live in, the laws you live under would be very different. It's also very interesting, as a historical coincidence, that just as dictatorial power was being consolidated in Paris by the committee, the man who would perfect dictatorial power was making his debut on the world stage. What is known as the Siege of Toulon would have never been brought to a successful conclusion for Republican France if it had not been for a brilliant young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte. And given that he will be weaving his way into and out of and back into this narrative now and for the next 5 years historically until the end of this series that we're in, we're going to bring this episode to a close with the introduction of the man who will be emperor. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica in 1769, as you just heard. He was the 3rd son of a minor noble family of Italian origin. And it's Italian origin because he just so happened to be born in the year that the island of Corsica was ceded to France by the Italian city-state of Genoa. So when he was born, his family's Italian, but he's technically French the year he's born, but he's Corsican. It's complicated. The internal politics of Corsica are just too complicated to get into for the purposes of what we need to talk about. But know that the greatest leader in French history was not very French. And throughout his entire youth, he was actually a Corsican nationalist, meaning he was all about Corsica being its own nation. And he actually was talking about things like the quote, and this is quoting Napoleon, the 30,000 Frenchmen who had been vomited upon our shores, end quote. So it's really weird that this Italian Corsican family produces the greatest French leader when he really wasn't all that French. Now his family, the Bonaparte family, was of some means and connections, and Napoleon's father served as the Corsican state representative to the court of Louis XVI, starting in 1777. That's 1 year after the Declaration of Independence, for those of you keeping track there. 2 years after his father was appointed, Napoleon himself was accepted to a provincial military academy up in northern France. And he was so good at it that upon graduation, he gained admission to a prestigious military school in Paris, where he trained to be an artillery officer. Now this theme, Napoleon's an artillery officer. Boy is he ever. The fact that he is standing next to a cannon in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is not lost on me. I understand what they were saying there. Artillery in this day and age is a math. It takes a mathematician's mind to be good at it, because it is not all computer guidance. It's about manually controlling angles and adjusting for windage and understanding the differences in terrain heights and everything. And he was amazing at it. And through his years in school, it was clear to everyone, students, faculty, that Bonaparte was exceptionally gifted, but also exceptionally driven. And this is where I'll draw a Julius Caesar parallel. Caesar was exceptionally driven, knew what he wanted, worked, and risked it all to get what he wanted. They were the types of people that never shut down. They never stopped working at what they were trying to achieve. Bonaparte excelled at just about everything. He never stopped reading, he never stopped writing, and more importantly, he never stopped thinking. And needless to say that these character traits did not make him very popular with the other students at these schools, these French students at these schools, who routinely teased him about his Corsican, heavily Italian-influenced accent. This is probably also a really good time to mention that Napoleon was not teased about a supposed diminutive stature. Contrary to all myth, he was not short. Napoleon Bonaparte was about 5'7", which is about average for his day and age. I think personally that the myth about his height derives from one of his more well-known nicknames. One nickname he's going to pick up along the way is the Little Corporal. It has to do with a uniform he wore at one point. But we'll get to the origin of that nickname down the road. Now, Napoleon's father died when he was at school, and that was a massive financial hit to his family because no longer did they have that, court representative income coming in. So this meant that Napoleon effectively, while at this prestigious French military academy, he had to complete a 2-year program in a single year, which, given how gifted he was of course able to do. And he emerged with a commission as a second lieutenant in the Army of the Ancien Regime in 1785. Now, he served fairly anonymously in the Army of the Ancien Regime until the Revolution broke out in 1789, at which point he seems to have taken advantage of all the uncertainty and demoralization of the officer corps we've spoken about, and he took a leave of absence from the army, which ended up lasting many years. He actually went back home to Corsica. This is where Where's Napoleon cards have been popping up, things like the city name of Ajaccio. He went back home to Corsica and threw himself into a 3-way fight for control of the island between French royalists, French revolutionaries, we know those two, and Corsican nationalists, we've just kind of introduced. And though Napoleon was close with the leader of the Corsican nationalists and had been a nationalist in his past, Napoleon decided to volunteer with the Revolutionary National Guard in Corsica, which ultimately pitted him against the nationalists. Well, that didn't go so well, and he was forced to leave Corsica in 1793. And a Corsican friend of his brought him to the attention of a man named Augustin Robespierre. That is the brother of Maximilian Robespierre. So Napoleon, I'm the guy who buys Neapolitan ice cream, which is an Italian reference, and scoops out the chocolate only. Now, this is a Corsican friend of Napoleon, putting him in front of Augustin Robespierre and saying, this guy's gifted. Do something with him. Now, Augustin Robespierre says, okay, takes him to his brother, who's growing in power in France. And these two guys, Augustin and Maximilian Robespierre, recognized that there was something very...
No way!
It's about 3:50.
Yes way. Enjoy those tributes. These two guys, Augustin and Maximilian Robespierre, recognized that there was something indeed special about Napoleon Bonaparte. And they pushed him into the artillery corps of the army. Against the wishes of the overall artillery commanders, and just as French forces were being put together to stamp out the Federalist uprisings in the summer of 1793. So we're only talking about 5 months ago, where Napoleon comes back to France proper and is put in front of men of power and told, do something with this gifted guy. And then Marseille fell, and the troops which Napoleon was now a part of moved to Toulon as a part of a force which would swell to about 35,000 Republican soldiers. Now, the siege of Toulon took months. It didn't just end in December. But as this siege dragged on, not very successfully, now Captain Bonaparte had zero qualms about writing a very blunt letter to the Committee of Public Safety about the incompetence of all the officers around him. Now, remember, Napoleon has a direct networked connection into the Committee of Public Safety in Maximilian Robespierre. Robespierre being the guy who put him into his current job. And Napoleon wasn't wrong. The officers that were at the time in charge of what was going down at Toulon were pretty incompetent. Napoleon had arrived and in about 5 minutes figured out what was going to be necessary to break the Allied hold on Toulon. There was a fortification that basically overlooked the bays that he knew, if took and properly fortified with artillery, would demand the British withdraw their navy. He knew it just by looking at it from a distance. And that proved to be the winning strategy. But because he was only Captain Bonaparte and he was trying to convince people to do what was necessary, he had a lot of downtime. And he spent this downtime drilling these totally inexperienced troops he had been given into one of the finest artillery units in the army. So, a couple of command replacements later, after people realized, hey, things aren't going as well as we want in Toulon, Bonaparte, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, was finally ordered to do what he always knew they were going to have to do to take Toulon. Here's another key thing about Napoleon. Leaders who lead from the front, especially generals, are loved by their troops. They are willing to share the risk. Napoleon led the charge personally, the infantry charge personally, to take that key British fortification overseeing the bay on December 16th, 1793. While he was taking it, he was wounded in the leg. But it was taken. And under Napoleon's direction, because he was there, it was fortified in the way he envisioned. And now that the forces in the bay and in the city were now totally exposed to a French bombardment, the British, there was some Spanish there too, the Allies just knew that they had to get out. But while they were pulling out, while the British were pulling out of Toulon, remember, this is the French naval dockyard for their Mediterranean fleet. The British made sure to burn as much... Fester, welcome in. The British made sure to burn as much of the French Mediterranean fleet as they could. Now, Toulon is retaken. This is a huge relief for everyone back in Paris because this was the foothold, right? This was the British foothold on southern France, and they had no ability to deploy any navy in the Mediterranean because Toulon was in enemy hands. But it is a more significant triumph for young Lieutenant Colonel Bonaparte personally. This event puts him on the map because it is recognized that he developed the strategy necessary to break the siege, and he led that strategy. It was undeniable from any perspective that the man who won the siege of Toulon was Napoleon Bonaparte. There were superiors above him who might want to take credit, but again, remember, Napoleon was already writing to this Committee of Public Safety saying, these guys don't know what they're doing. Here's what has to happen. It's plain as day to me. I can see it. So at the end of this cycle and the siege of Toulon being broken, it's not disputable that Napoleon was the guy who broke the siege and led the charge. This kicks off a career that not only sees him on the map, but holding the map in his hands and actually redrawing all the lines in Europe. It's a career that will redefine how armies are built. It will a career that will lead to laws of Western civilization being rewritten into a form you recognize today. But all that for Napoleon is now in our future, and we are on his road with him now, which is why the reward for Where's Napoleon is gone from the show now, because he's going to step in at his moments and we will talk about him. He is now a part of the French revolutionary narrative. But next episode, we'll get into one of the defining factional fights of the revolution between the Indulgents and the Ultras, with the guillotine looming in the background as punishment for defeat, and, as I said, they'll both lose. I have been looking forward to this episode for a while, because, again, Napoleon is a fascinating character to me. Hopefully you enjoyed his introduction into what is the critical event in his early career that nobody talks about, because all they know is he crowned himself emperor in 1804. By the way, Waterloo's 1814, the same year the White House burns. For anybody that's trying to keep track of where we're going, well, Waterloo was not the first time Napoleon was defeated. Sorry, Waterloo's not 1814. That's 1816. There's another key event in 1814 when Napoleon marches into Russia and doesn't really estimate the Russian winter very well. Something that Hitler would do too. Anyway, it's time for a quiz. Thanks for hanging out tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Quiz time. Before we jump over to the quiz scene, again, exclamation point answer, and your answer puts it into a file. Do your best. Take a stab. You have a leaderboard that is, for a piece of swag at the end of whatever, but there's no penalty for getting it wrong. Don't do any joke answers, but take a stab. See how much you remember from tonight. And it helps me gauge how many people are, involved and invested and listening. So hopefully you guys, I'll take a swing at it tonight. But here we go. Alrighty. The first question of the night. You have 1 minute after I read the question out loud to answer. Why is the suicide of Jérôme Pétion and the remaining Girondins in 1794 ironic? Why is the suicide of Jérôme Pétion and the remaining Girondins in 1794 ironic? Well, I can't get the year out right now. Gilly is in, Rocket is in. You have 38 seconds. Why is the suicide of Jérôme Pétion and the remaining Girondins in 1794 ironic? Turius is in. Turius is in the double-digit club. Again, thanks for hanging out tonight. Been waiting to play that music video for about a month. I've been sitting on it. It's been done for a while. And but just once the video, I'll probably post the unlisted link to it in Discord later. 6 seconds left. And why all of a sudden is my back itchy? Ah. Manny gets in. Well, I wanted it to have that impact, right? That boom, here he is. Here's Napoleon. One of these great men of history that Fix probably, I don't know, idolizes a little bit. I like geniuses. Hey, I don't know why I just typed that back in there. I just typed the same question back in like we're going to run again. The first answer comes to us from Gilly. The Great Terror would come to an end the following month. Yes, that's the answer. More specifically, Robespierre would get his due the following month. Glad you were able to hang out, Gilly. I walked into this tonight with the expectation that you would be out tonight. Next answer. It's only a month before the committee would be overthrown from power. Yes. Rocket gets it. The next answer comes from Turks because they were waiting for the fall of the revolution, which would happen a month later. We'll give it to you. The fall of the Committee of Public Safety. The revolution itself won't end properly until, I would say, the consulship, when Napoleon is handed his first real total control level. But yes, that is good enough. But I like to make the distinction. The end of the Committee of Public Safety is just another end to another phase of the French Revolution, which we have said, hey, there's probably 3 or 4 revolutions in here. Yeah, it's one of them. The next response comes to us from Manny, because it was a short period before they would have been thrown from power. Yep, I know what you're saying. Before the Committee of Public Safety would have been thrown from power. You got it. The next answer. That's the end of valid answers. Anybody else answer? Because they kicked off the revolution. No. They didn't kick off the revolution. I would say that the Duc d'Orléans kicked off the revolution. Did I spell that right? Nope, I didn't. Just making sure before I put the next question in. I always type these questions so fast. I'm just like, I don't spell check them, and I should probably start typing them in a Word document or Google Docs or something. The next question. Why did Jean-Marie Collot des Bois...
Clonk that follow button.
Thanks, Perm. I'll wait. Why did Jean-Marie Collot des Bois need to resort to firing cannons at the people of Lyon to execute some of them? Why did Jean-Marie Collot des Bois need to resort to firing cannons at the people of Lyon to execute some of them? Gilly is in, Rocket's in. Turius is in. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Arky's in 20 seconds ago. Why did Jean-Marie Collot des Bois need to resort to firing cannons at the people of Lyon to execute some of them? The first answer comes to us from... His tribunals were convicting so many people that the guillotine could not keep up. Yep, that is the answer. Next answer comes to us from Rocket. The verdicts were coming out too fast. The guillotine couldn't keep up with the work. Correct. The next answer. Turi, they were killing people too quickly for the guillotine to keep up. Killing in terms of condemning, yes. The next answer. Arky, because they couldn't keep up with the executions by guillotine alone. That is correct. One more, I think. They could not keep up with the amount of people being sentenced to death. That's correct. Look at you guys creeping up into the middle teens here. It's weird. I like it. The next question coming your way, once I make sure I didn't mess up any spelling, is what was the significant limiting factor as to why the Catholic and Royal Army could not effectively link up with British forces on Jersey? What was the significant limiting factor as to why the Catholic and Royal Army could not effectively link up with British forces on Jersey? "30 seconds. What was the significant limiting factor as to why the Catholic and Royal Army could not effectively link up with the British forces on Jersey?" Those of you out there lurking tonight, just paying attention, I also value you as well. The numbers I see when I look over at the dashboard of just who's chatting and what things are, I really appreciate all the time and attention you give me and your desire to learn about this. So thank you much for hanging out tonight. Turry's in, Arky's in, Gilly's in, Rocket's in. 8 seconds. Manny gets in. 5 again. Awesome. I'll take 50 if 50 people want to reply. The first response. But thank you very much for the participation as well. The amount it took of time to send messages, and the messages were sent through London and then to Jersey and back. No direct communication line. No direct communication line is the correct answer. The intelligence for all of it ran through London, and that added weeks to the amount of time it took to get the messages back and forth. Rocket gets the correct answer. The next response from Gilly: communications with the British were too slow. The messages in British armies had to go back and forth with London during the process, slowing everything down. That is correct. This is one of those things where logisticians win wars, right? Intelligence is logistics, and the ability to properly plan logistics, yeah, that's what wins wars. So this is one of those great moments down those lines. The next answer: because communication chain having to go from France to England and back. That is correct. France to England, England being London and Jersey, but yes. Slow communications was basically the answer. Turry: distance. The British forces were some 50 miles away. That is not the answer. Good attempt, though. That is accurate. They were 50 miles away, but that is not the limiting factor. 50 miles could have been covered in a day or two by the ships at Jersey. It is telling the ships at Jersey they needed to get to Granville. That's the problem. And that message took too much time. Good attempt, though. Communications were too slow. That is the answer in a nutshell. The next question, which as always there are 10, and this one's a grim one. Describe what is meant by, quote, Republican baptism, end quote, as it pertains to the terror under Jean-Baptiste Carrier. Yes, I'm asking you to write something nasty down. History is nasty sometimes. If you are enjoying Fixier's Heavy Metal History, you want to catch up on things, this is your first or second or third time here and you don't know what the hell's going on, down in my panels is a link to YouTube. My YouTube channel, there is a playlist for all 27 prior episodes. It'll take you some time to catch up, but I believe it's worth it. Let's see. Gilly's in. Terry's in. Rocket's in. Thank you very much as well there, Gilly. That link in chat as well will get you there. All of my VODs go there, including all the space stuff. And the now confirmed to be happening soon to maybe in about a month and a half D&D campaign that we're going to run. All right. The first answer comes to us from Gilly. The act of killing people by stripping them naked, tying them together, and sinking them on a barge by hauntless monsters. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It is the barge plug pulling that Carrier started with the clergy, but he took it a step further and he put men and women together, tied them together, and then drowned them. It was pretty gruesome. That's the answer. Next answer comes to us from large-scale execution by drowning in the river. Now, that is the baptism. It's the marriage. I'm sorry. That is what Gilly was describing. But yes, drowning them in the river. My own brain switched the word in my head. Republican baptism is the act of just hog tying the priests and whoever else, putting them on the barge, pulling the plugs, boom, in the rivers. That is correct. I don't know why my brain made the logical jump to Republican marriages, which is what I just described when I was referring to Gilly's answer. Tying them together, tying them up. Correct. Terry got it. Yeah, I jumped to it in my brain. It's still right, though. You still phrased it correctly. The next response. They were tied up and put on a boat that had plugs that would be released by Carrier and drowned. Yes, by Carrier and drowned. I don't know if he was doing the pulling of the plugs himself, but he sure was ordering it. But yeah, that is the answer. Maybe he did. Probably did it once or twice just because he wanted the sheer masochistic joy of it. But Rocky gets it. The next answer. The execution performed by tying people to a ship then sinking it with them on board. Yes, that is the answer. Specially designed barges. The next answer. That's the end of valid answers. I'm pretty sure we got one more in there. Drowning while nude. Not good enough. The barge, the intentional sinking, something along those lines, that one's not good enough. I usually give a lot of leniency, but that one's not good enough. The next question. What two things were troubling Robespierre near the end of 1793? I see I made it in time for the other quiz. Pie, welcome in. Napoleon Day, Pie. Find the YouTube VOD. Napoleon's introductions today. You just missed it. You have a gift, though. What gift? Gillies and Rocketson. Terry's in. One message was deleted by a moderator. Oh, no, that's just the code doing that. I think the gift is coming in last minute. Well, we're happy to have you here, Pi, as always. Answers are in. Time is up. The first answer is from Gilly, I believe. Lack of standardization of the execution of the Great Terror. Yes. Some places were far too bloody. Some places were being far too lenient. And the violent dechristianization of France. Yes, those are the two things that Robespierre was having a problem with at the end of 1793. The next answer comes to us from dechristianization and the blood split leniency of reps on mission. That is close enough. That encapsulates the problem. Next answer comes to us from Turi. The two extremist factions arguing over the path forward. That is one thing. And is not either one of the two problems. You're referring to the ultras and the indulgents arguing over two things, which are dechristianization and should the terror end. But that is not the answer. Good jump, and I can see how two rang in your brain to land there, but that is not the answer. Any more? That's the end of valid answers. I think Terry was last. He was. Next question. Why did Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton both oppose dechristianization? You can start typing now as I spell check this. But here we go. Why did Robespierre and Danton both oppose dechristianization? Apart from it being messed up. It's messed up. It's not a good enough answer, okay? Just throwing that one out there. 45 seconds. Why did Robespierre and Danton, and from now on when I say Robespierre, I'm referring to Maximilien Robespierre. If I mean his brother, I'll use his brother's name. Why did Robespierre and Danton both oppose dechristianization? Gilly is in. Rocket is in. 20 seconds left. Ten seconds. Time is up. 2 answers. Gilly. They considered it to be dangerously counterproductive, as the people of France would not accept having a deity to worship. Part of the answer. I'll read mine. They both saw that the people of France believed in a higher power, and that prior efforts to rip religion from them had produced bad results. Let's see what Rocket does here first. Now it's just the two of you in here. They knew that counties did not run proper without religious worship of the higher power. I don't think either of you got it. The core part is that they could look back at all of the prior heavy-handedness at the church, which I made sure I mentioned 2 of, and say, look at what's happened before. These efforts we've taken to hurt the Catholic Church have been the biggest sources of our problems. The fact that these people believe in a higher power doesn't mean, it means if we step in and just try to wipe it out, that we're just creating our own problems again. They both believed it was really stupid to try to do something not just as simple as put the church under the control of the state, but to purge the church. They saw it as really dangerous. And that's the reason that neither one, you didn't catch the prior past history part of the answer. Next question. Describe the 2 major things under the law of 14 Frimaire which allowed the Committee of Public Safety to acquire supreme authority. Take the things I mentioned tonight and generalize them into 2 buckets. Those are the 2 buckets I'm looking for. Describe the 2 major things under the law of 14 Frimaire, which allowed the Committee of Public Safety to acquire supreme authority. Now that I've named the law of 14 Frimaire, you know why I had to do the calendar last week. Rocket is in. I can tell you Rocket's got it. 20 seconds. I don't care about misspelling as long as I get it. Don't kill yourself over spelling. I know typing within a minute, it happens. Don't kill yourself on misspelling. As long as I can get the gist of it. Gilly is in with 8 seconds left, and everyone else who was participating is now sat down. Rocket's up first. Rocket says, brought the reps on mission to heal. Yes. Made them funnel everything up and down through the Committee of Public Safety. Gutted local governments' authorities of their power. Also the other thing, yes. The consolidation of both of those 2 lanes. Reps on mission can no longer act unilaterally. Local governments can no longer act unilaterally. Those are the 2 things. Sitting on your hands. Why? Are they cold, Manny? Rocket gets it. Gilly. Reps on mission now had to report and request authorization for its actions. Local governments no longer allowed to interpret laws for their own uses, nor were they allowed to create their own laws. Yes, that is it. The reports going back and forth from local jurisdictions back to the Committee of Public Safety. It's this massive fist that just gets brought down around everything. But that is it. Gilly gets it. I'm interested in the answer to this question. I phrased it this way for a reason. Why was Napoleon's victory at Toulon so significant? There are many answers. One more after this. Gilly at 93, Rocket 78, Manny in third at 16 with Archie on his heels at 15, and Turi right behind him at 13. 30 seconds left. Why was Napoleon's victory at Toulon so significant? Gilly pretty much captured both of the angles you can go at this with. Arky's in, Manny's in. 5 seconds left. I'll take it after the fact, Rocket. There we go, you're in anyway. So there are two ways to take this answer, in my estimation. You could look in the context of the day, right? Napoleon basically leads the charge, devises the strategy, and liberates the city of Toulon. That in and of itself is a big deal. It is the major French dockyard and naval port in the Mediterranean for France. It ousts the British from the major stronghold or foothold in southern France. All of that is strategically important for the Republic. But then there's the other side of that. It's massively important for the man named Napoleon. This event rockets him to stardom. It makes him a superstar across France overnight. It gives him credibility for everything else he will do after the fact. And given that he has a lane into the people of power right now, they see that guy, what everyone said about him was right. And we need to start handing him more and more things. The first answer comes from us. Yes way. Gilly. It was France's key port to the Mediterranean in the short term. Yep. But it turned Napoleon into a rock star for the French. It was a massive contributor toward his eventual rise of power. Yep. That is both answers, both plays to go at it. The next answer. Because it put him on the map of the Republican government. Yes, that is a completely valid response. Put him on the map everywhere in France. Arky moves up to 16. The next response. Manny, it was his first win of fame. True. And promotion when his plan involving the capture of the fortifications. Yes, it was all of that. It was a PR just windfall for Napoleon. Cannot overstate how when this report comes back to the Committee of Public Safety that Toulon is liberated and the name Napoleon is all over it, how much that connects lanes to Robespierre to say, oh, Napoleon. And then to the people of France, here's your hero. It's hugely important. Manny gets it. I think that's it. No, Rocket put one in at the last second. He led the charge himself and freed Toulon from British control after sending messages to the CPS. What's CPS? Committee of Public Safety. He led the charge and freed Toulon, but that's not why winning. That's what he did. The victory of Toulon's and captured it in question. From British control. That's the part that's important there. So that you're on the fringe of the answer there, Rocket, based on everything else we talked about it through the other answers, but that does get it. When I write, I have a clipboard of phrases that I'm using a lot. Committee of Public Safety is always on there. So I'm just like, paste. I don't want to type it out every time. Usually it's key names too. Like Desbois. You wouldn't believe how many times you would mistype the word or the name Desbois as you're typing it through. So I usually just have Deglantine's another one I like to have on the clipboard just because I always massacre them when I try to type them with my hands because my hands just don't process the apostrophes well. Yeah, I do that a lot. The last question, and as is our kind of habit here, it's not so much an opinion, but it is a position of debate question. Make the argument from the position of the indulgence at the end of 1793. If you go over the time on the last question, you're fine. Take your time, get your answer the way you want it worded. We will review all of them for points. Make the argument from the position of the indulgence, which means you have to understand what they are arguing for, and then make that argument from their position at the end of 1793. And I love saying those words, end of 1793, because we're getting there. We are tripping over into 1794. 1793 has been a monster year. Go back and look how many episodes we've done on 1793. It might blow your mind. It's probably close to half. Maybe a little bit short of half of the episodes. Certainly mid-teens to now have been 1793. Because remember, it all starts with the death of the king to now. It's a lot of episodes. Continue to take your time. Time is up. We'll take the questions once you guys get the answers in. While you're finishing off, Turi is in. We're going to have a look at who we will be rating tonight, but I have a good idea who it's going to be. Again, thank you all for your time and attention tonight. Let's see. Maybe not. I thought they'd be live by now, but maybe not. So we draw this out by a couple other seconds. Okay, we got a couple of answers in here tonight. Let's have a look. So, yeah, no one got in before the buzzer. That's fine. Removing religion and executing members of the church is only going to make enemies more enemies than it's worth. So, let's start with the fundamental position of the indulgence. The indulgence and the ultras are arguing two things. One, that the ultras want to de-Christianize everything under a bear who's leading that charge publicly, and that they want to ratchet up the terror. The indulgence don't. They want to stop de-Christianization, and they want to ratchet down the terror. So the major argument to make here is that look at how the emergency has passed. That the Federalist revolt is turned down. The Vendee has been suppressed. Toulon is liberated. We don't need to be doing what we're doing because everything is stable again. The Dechristianization argument is there. That removing religion and executing members of the church is only going to make more enemies than it's worth. That is a part of it. So it's valid. But I want to make sure I put the whole context out before, now that we've got an answer out there. So I'll give Turi that. The next answer. Gilly. The terror had grown out of control and only become an instrument of widespread murder for some very overzealous representatives on mission. Not only that, there were worries some who had been acquitted in other departments have been bribed their way. Now, let me read it off the text because you are exceeding my character limit, which is okay. But let me go get the actual document open here. Answers. Apparently, it's not that file. So, it's not that the representatives on the mission were out of control. That's not their argument. Their argument is that the terror itself is unnecessary, not due to them, but due to conditions in France generally. So, I don't know, why did I not write to that file? What file? I'm not going to give you that one because you didn't get either one of those two. The position that the representatives themselves were problematic was not where the indulgence were coming from. They were coming from the position that France itself was stable. Does it flush from the file when the answer pops? No, it flushes from the file whenever the next answer is read up. But I think what I did is I have a thing on my desktop for quiz answers, but I don't think that's the right file. I think it actually is inside of my my bots folder. Let me look. It's been a while since I built this and made it work. Let's see. Images. That's not it. It's in Firebot. Where did I put you? I don't remember where. Let me go look in Firebot real quick and where I put it. Commands. This will be answer. Answer. Writes to where? Write to file. Writes to Firebot text files. That makes sense. That's where I would have put it. I don't mind looking to make sure we get it right. Yep, there it is. Fix heavy metal history. Answers. It's a quiz. Yep. Answers. All right, here's Gilly's answer. Actually, it does unload it as soon as I do it because Rocket's answer is in there next. Display answer. That's where it should be. Let me close out some of these text files. Okay, here's the full answer from Gilly. The terror had grown out of control and had become an instrument of widespread murder for some very overzealous representatives on mission. Not only that, there were worries some who had been acquitted in other departments had bribed their way into acquittal. Eventually, the public would fight back, and that would not be true justice. That's still not the answer. That is still not the answer. Now I know where the file is. Nah. I want to make sure we get it right. But that is not the answer. Next answer. The Great Fear was no longer needed. That's the key point. The revolts had been put down, so they were no longer a problem. The Allies were on retreat. And to top it all off, Toussaint had been liberated from British control. Very correct. Any more? Any more? Any more? Is it just Rocket? I gotta close all this other crap I opened to look at Gilly's answer, which I don't mind. I opened a bunch of stuff and didn't close it. Rocket was the last one in. That is it. All right, that is the quiz for tonight. Thank you all for participating. Refresh this one more time. No, they're not doing... Okay. People I thought were live are not live. Alrighty. Let's see. I don't know. I don't know who we're going to raid. Anybody have a suggestion out there for people to raid? I'm still shocked that for a moment tonight I was tied with Manny. Now, thank you all for participating. I really appreciate you guys giving me the time and attention here. It's a big episode for the French Revolution, but a bigger episode for Series 2 and getting Napoleon onto the board. I was so happy to see 5 people answering a question at one point. Me too. I love seeing the participation. So a couple notes. My new job as manager is going pretty well. What a company wants in a review and what the military wanted in an annual review are very different. I was able to knock out reviews. Like the first review I wrote this week, I got the draft of it done in 90 minutes. And I was able to get 3 of them into draft status by the end of the week. I have to write 7. So I have until February 16th to do that. I am planning on writing another one tomorrow. So I'm well on my way. I feel like I'm well on my way to beat that deadline. I can't work on 2 of them until February, though. So on that note, I feel like as long as work continues to cooperate, in a general sense, I can keep the pace with heavy metal history. D&D probably going to debut at some point in March once we figure out a couple more things. I did do one thing that was really cool today. We have some camera shy people for D&D, and we're still going to show a box that has, a picture of their character. What I worked out, though, was how to make that picture light up when they talk in Discord, so you can tell who's speaking. That'll be a part of the integration of the display as we move forward. Still probably looking for 2 people that kind of fit the time zone. Still need to figure out date and time, but the plan is still sometime in March. So yeah, it's pretty cool. But on that note, we D&D is coming together pretty well. I feel like we'll probably run both things, Fixers Heavy Metal History and D&D, because D&D prep is pretty easy with me. I just have to read it. Any interesting campaign? The campaign will be the Rime of the Frost Maiden campaign, which is a D&D module that takes characters from like 1 to I think 12. It is built in Icewind Dale, but I have plans for that as well as a GM on how to kind of adapt it into something bigger. But yeah, it's going to be used on Foundry Tabletop, Virtual Tabletop, which I've spent a lot of time building in. I've got a lot of really dynamically lit scenes, and I've learned really how to present that well to not only the players, but the audience. Dice rolls will show up. We got a chat stream of everything that's happening, so you guys can see info blocks of what's being used and things like that. It's coming together really well. It's probably the most work I've ever put into any one of my scenes, and that's saying something, considering I put a lot of work into Darkest Dungeon. I assume you'll be loading those to YouTube as well. Yes. Whatever we end up naming the campaign will go into its own playlist on YouTube, and I will be sure to publicize that. Pi, on that note, I'm the forever GM, man. I picked up Dungeons & Dragons when it was Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition around about the time I was 10. Thank you to my Bopchi, my grandma, who decided to tell my mom...
My lord! Yourself.
Tell my mom no. And she bought me the first box sets, and I started playing at my friend's house, and I was the guy who was good at math. So I was the guy who had to GM it, because back then it was THACO, and you had to figure everything out back to Armor Class 0 instead of the D20 system, which is much easier. But yeah, I've GM'd some pretty long campaigns. I've GM'd the world's largest dungeon. I've GM'd a lot of homebrew stuff. I tend to be the sort of GM that likes to have characters drive things, not numbers and abilities and min-maxing. I don't stand for munchkins, nor do I stand for rules lawyers. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. We've already come up with some good house rules, and I think you may find the character interactivity of the people to be fun, Rocket. Mads will be one of the characters. Manny's going to have one of the characters. And how they react to what I throw at them and what the campaign throws at them is probably going to be pretty funny. especially because Mads is not a combat-oriented role player. She likes the narrative context and investigation of things much more than she likes I throw a fireball at something. So I've had role players like that in the past in my groups, and they tend to be the ones that make the moments. So we've also never played D&D. D&D is all about creativity. It's just about wanting to put on the clothes of somebody else. It's very much where video games, RPG video games, get their thing from, where you have this idea, this concept that you build and you want to personify, and good role players personify their characters, and don't really worry about, well, this ability will give me a +1 on this. That's not as important. People who, role play for role play's sake. Terry's seen me role play. He's seen me run a character named the Krieg in Master Pose campaign. I did a one day sit down with their campaign, and it was a lot of fun. But yeah, so it's coming, and I will digress on that point. But I'm sure Terry still remembers the Krieg from that day, because that was a memorable day when I actually saw a paladin kill a kid. It's pretty funny. Accidentally, it was pretty funny. All right, so let's get out of here. I am going to drop you guys off with Clown because he is playing some Dead by Daylight, and he's really good at it, and he's an entertaining and good guy. Yeah, what a campaign. That was so funny that day. But anyway, you guys, thank you as always. Appreciate your time. We'll be back hopefully next week, but I will keep you posted. I usually have a good idea by Thursday midday whether I'm going to be able to finish the episode in time or not. You'll know by then. And I will just try to keep the pace as much as I can. But let's get out of here and stop talking. How about that? So make sure you follow our good friend on Dustin, 7:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. weekdays. I don't know what he's playing right now because I didn't get a chance sitting there much this week. There's Permanerb right after him, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It looks like he's enjoying that game. Go hang out with my good friend Permanoob. Give him a follow. Linked in chat. Miles Morales for Dustin. Thank you. Gilly. Tomorrow night, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Dragon Age Inquisition is where he was living. There's Intent Rocket. She was playing LA Noire today. And I don't know what you're doing next week, Rocket, but Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday mornings for Rocket. Then make sure you give our friends who have produced our music for Heavy Metal History a follow. That's CF Live. He's my friend again because he said so, even though we questioned our friendship early in the week. Make sure you give him a follow. Give Diggity a follow, though. He's likely not going to stream this week because Fish is visiting him. That's his fiancée, Fish. Have a good night and a good weekend. And I will talk to you all later. I love you all. Here comes Clown.
Be excellent to each other.
My lord?